Yeah, good morning, afternoon, and welcome to this series. And I'm going to talk about cloud native, and I'm from Container Solutions, which is cloud native consultancy. And this series of events is actually 3 events. The first one is happening now, which is more on higher level transformational story of cloud native. The second one, which is mentioned here, is more technical and will happen next week in July 16th. And the third one will be specifically about Cisco products in the cloud native world, and that will happen the week later. So you're welcome to join each one of them. They're sort of continuing each other, going deeper and deeper into technology. And now to the actual story. So yes, and before actual story, another one is a strategy webinar with Simon Wardley and Jamie Dobson that will happen in July 22nd. That will be mostly about strategy and decision making. Now, really, to the story. So there are 2 types of stories. One is a man goes to a journey and another stranger comes to town. And this story will be about the stranger comes to town. And before I talk about strangers, this is the actual main character of the story, the protagonist of the story, and the company is called WellsGrid. It's not a real company. It's sort of compilation of our existing customers or past customers. It's a financial company, happen to be, but it could be company in any other field. And they're sort of mid-sized, few hundred people, successful, making good money, successfully competing in the market, nice place to work. It exists maybe 15, 20 years. Yeah, so it's one of those companies we probably all of us worked at some point. By the way, can anyone recognize which office is this? There is like a hint all over. You will have to unmute yourself to do that, or you can send it on the chat. That's fine, then
looks Asian.
It is Asian, true, but more specific, you can actually guess the name of the company.
PlayStation.
Okay. PlayStation, yes, it's Sony. Right, so you see those blue boxes in every single cubicle. There is a blue box, which is an old PlayStation. Anyway, this is not part of the story. It's just a segue. Right, so this is WellsGrid. In the WellsGrid, we have 3 main characters, or 3 types of characters. The main character that I'm going to talk about is Jenny. Jenny is a middle manager, technical middle manager, something like head of engineering or VP of products or something like that. And then the executive team and engineers. So who are the strangers? We're talking about financial world. In other worlds, there are different strangers, but in this world, there are few examples. The first one is Starling Bank. This is a UK-based small bank, which is growing. It's a startup that opened the doors in, I think, 2014, you can see here. But from the moment they got the license until they actually get a fully functional bank, it was 1 year. So in exactly 1 year, they built a fully functional bank with less than 20 engineers. So that's how fast you can do that. The other example is Amazon, which is a tech giant. Now, obviously, it's not a bank or it doesn't do any financial services, but for whatever reason, and no one knows, they actually have a banking license. And if they would like to, they could become a commercial bank with as many as 70 million customers in US alone in a matter of a couple of years. And the third example is ING Bank from Netherlands, which is by their managers, they actually want to be a technology company rather than a bank versus a bank with tech department. So they spent a decade investing massive amounts of effort and time into their tech capabilities. And they are by far one of the most advanced technologically banks in the world. So, and there is a new stranger, which is the new virus thing, which I'll mention at the end, how that affects the current world. So, the problem is that although WellsGrid is actually a successful company making a lot of money, it's actually a massive existential risk. And the reason is because it's growing incrementally, and it's sort of doing similar things to what it's been doing for a long time. But then once the new disruptive companies come, they come in exponential speed. So basically, they they dominate the market in the speed of like imagine Uber and Airbnb. They maybe about a decade old, maybe 15 years old. And before that, it was local taxis and hotels, and it was very even unimaginable to think that those two companies would dominate the world this way. Right. So why do we think that this is happening? Why those companies are so dominant and so successful? So the general idea is that it's because they can deliver value faster, because they can go from idea to actual product to customer and understand the needs of the customer, and then they factor the product and again and again and again an extremely fast speed. And that's because they're using modern technologies like cloud native. And the problem for companies like WellsGrid is that in the beginning, they don't even see the competition coming. They don't even imagine that Starling is important, because they only have in the beginning maybe 1,000 customers, which really is nothing for large high street banks. And once they start seeing it, it means that those smaller competitors or unexpected competitors, they start picking up speed. And at that point, once they show any sort of traction, they start they gain essentially almost unlimited access to funding from venture capital or any sort of investments or internal investment by companies like ING or Amazon. And then they put all this investment into engineering, and they start developing their products even faster. At that point, it could be already too late for WellsGrid to respond, because the competitors are going extremely fast, and any sign of losing market share, what WellsGrid would do was to basically reduce investment in innovation, right, to cut costs. And by reducing investment in innovation, they actually make their position against those competitors even worse. And once in a while, which is very rare, but could happen, something like coronavirus comes, and then everything changes entirely. But again, I'll talk about this a bit later. Right. So in the beginning, I will talk a bit about this first type of change, when it's just normal, traditional change where the competition is slowly gaining market share. So at this point, we have somebody like Starling Bank competing, and ING and all the others. And then Jenny, who is a technical middle manager, she understands that something needs to be done. Otherwise, they will start losing to competition. So the first traditional response in companies like WellsGrid is to say, I mean, how hard can it be? A bit of Kubernetes and on public cloud and microservices, right? We went to all these nice conferences. We heard all these super interesting talks, and they all say how Docker and Kubernetes are easy. They, play games and Tetris and Kubernetes and real life. It really feels very, very natural and easy. So they basically put couple of those projects on the backlog, to the existing development teams. And about 6 to 12 months later, they say, okay, actually, not much happened. So it's, yes, we have some cluster somewhere installed in some laptop, or maybe we provisioned something on the public cloud, but really nothing is refactored, nothing is in production, but really very few things happened. At this point, they think that the main reason is because they didn't spend enough resources. So, okay, we need to do something else. So then in traditional company, the next step after realizing that the project requires more time, you need to actually get approval from the executives. To get approval from executives to a large scale project, you need to prepare a strong proposal, full architecture plan for coming year. And after doing it for a couple of months, Jenny and her lead architect presented to the executives. And the general idea is that for a while, of course, so they will basically split the team into half, continue working on legacy, and the second half working on the new platform, on cloud native platform with microservices. And after a short period of time, let's say about 6 months, once the new platform is functional, it's correct that in the first 6 months there will be reduced productivity, reduced level of productivity, because the legacy team, the team working on existing products, is half of the original team. But after the new platform is ready, they will go so fast that they will definitely repay the debt very quickly. And from that point, they will be super fast. Okay, the story sounds good. The technical team has proven itself as successful over the years, so the executive gave them the approval to go for it. Unfortunately, another 6 to 12 months later, very few things happened again. Right? Yes, there is some progress. Again, the clusters are somewhat bigger, and there is more stuff installed, but still nothing is in production, or maybe something trivial is in production. And the biggest problem is that no one really knows when it's going to be finished. And in meanwhile, the legacy team is half the size, delivering half the value, and struggling to even keep up with existing demand. So why it's so difficult? And generally, it's new, complex, and requires new ways of thinking. Basically, the way cloud native is defined, and this is the goal of WellsGrid, is to become cloud native. The way cloud native defined by CNCF, Cloud Native Compute Foundation, is very technical. It's microservices, containers, and dynamic orchestration. They also say that it's to build great products faster. So in different words is about fast innovation. But still, the definition is very technical. That's why engineers feel that, I mean, how hard can it be? Again. So if we present it in this way, so basically infrastructure, provisioning, and architecture, this is what CNCF says is cloud native. We think that it's much bigger thing. So to be cloud native, you also want to have different delivery processes, different team structure, and different way to build products, and eventually even different culture, which is more collaborative, open, and less hierarchical. Because if you don't have that, if you don't look at it in a holistic way, then there's a very low chance that you will be able to successfully gain the benefits of the cloud native technologies. The second part is it's new ecosystem. It's very complex. This is again from CNCF. There is the full version of this. This is all the tools and products and companies operating in cloud native world. Today, there is more than 1,300 boxes in this. You don't really need to read it. You cannot really read it. It's essentially, if you want to have a successful cloud native platform with cloud native development, you probably need about 20 of those boxes to be installed in your system. And for that, you need to understand all the rest, at least high level, to make choices that will fit your future needs. So back to WellsGrid. At this point, again, we don't know, so the platform is not ready, the microservices are not ready, we don't know when it's going to be ready, and we're delivering half the speed existing products. At this point, the executive team losing its patience. They basically saying, we would love to see cloud native, it's excellent idea. The thing is that we promised all these features to all those customers. If we don't deliver, we will start losing customers, or we are losing new deals. So I don't really care about cloud native, but if those 5 features are not delivered within the next 3 months, we just going to scrap the entire initiative and move everyone back to the legacy products. So we have to do something else again. And just again, a reminder, we are now 1 or 2 or 3 years into the transformation, and still there is very little progress to show. Some companies don't even admit to themselves that they struggle. They just keep pushing forward in denial of the situation. So some of the tools I'm going to use to answer basically the question how to do it, or I will show one of the ways to do it in more reasonable way. So first is difference between creativity and proficiency. So every initiative, every project starts in creative way. Creative is sort of mystery, right? Mystery means like you have no idea what you're doing. You generally never done it before. Imagine McDonald's, right? So a couple of brothers decided that they want to do drive-through restaurant instead of drive-in. So essentially the main difference between fast food chains before McDonald's and McDonald's was that people had to actually approach the counter and ask for food instead of sitting in their cars or at tables, wait for a waiter to serve them the food. No one knew if it's going to work or not, so they tried. And I'm sure there were many others that tried other things that didn't work out, but theirs did. Then after a while, it was successful. They opened another restaurant, another, and after about 4, at the fifth, they started struggling. So they sort of knew what's working, but they didn't know how to scale it. So they knew general ideas, but they knew intuitively how it works, but they couldn't convert it to clear instructions for other people. And then later on, if you saw the movie about McDonald's, there was this guy, Ray Kroc. He took the McDonald's and created the McDonald's of today, basically scaled it up. And now everything is algorithmic. Everything is by the book. Essentially, you have a book, you open a new restaurant, you get this book, and you have to do everything exactly like it says. So then it becomes proficient. And there is no better or worse, right? Every initiative requires creativity and proficiency. The thing is that the teams working in creative way and proficient way require different ways of working. So research or design thinking are more appropriate in earlier stages, something like Agile or Kanban in middle stages, and eventually actually bureaucracy, lean and waterfall is very efficient. That's why large enterprises, large scale products typically build in much more bureaucratic and process-oriented way. So the process in the beginning actually is counterproductive, but at the end essential. Also, typically the team structure changes and becomes more and more hierarchical and bureaucratic, which is actually efficient way to manage large groups. And also, in a creative way, yes, it's essential to create a new idea, but the money comes at the later stages. Once you scale it, and essentially the economy of scale brings the large profits. And the argument from research says that actually teams that are working in creative way and proficient way need to be managed differently. The creative teams need to have purpose and safety and autonomy, essentially go and do whatever you like, versus proficient teams that they need to have high repetition, small set of rules, clear feedback. They repeat the same thing over and over again, right? So that's why you need to understand what do you expect from the team to do, and then manage those teams in different ways. what is important for any enterprise or any reasonable company is to keep this creativity and proficiency in the right balance. So this is an old model from McKinsey. It's called Three Horizons model. Essentially, they said about 30 years ago that for any successful company, it's essential to spend most of their time, let's say 70%, on delivering the products that they're selling right now. Then significant portion of their time, maybe 25% on innovation, and a bit of their time on research that will maybe bring something in the remote future. And it's very important to make these things feed each other. So the delivery, innovation becomes delivery, research becomes innovation. And there are champions who make sure that that those things are done in the right balance. So unfortunately, most of the traditional enterprises spend absolute majority of their time on delivering their products. That was the story of Wall Street. They had no way, no space to innovate or research. It means that once the other companies started adopting Kubernetes and containers and microservices, they had no knowledge or experience in that because they never really spent any effort or time on researching those things. Of course, startups spend most of their time on innovation. This is their business model, and universities, their entire purpose is research. But the first part, the balanced approach, this is essential for successful enterprises. Tool number two is patterns. So patterns came from architecture, actual architecture, not software, and from a person called Christopher Alexander. The general idea of Christopher Alexander was that he didn't want to build, or he thought that it's a bad idea to build massive monolithic construction projects, like massive buildings. You finish it, then you hand over to the user, because it's very similar to the software agile approach. Once you start building it, so first you don't collect correct requirements from the user because you don't speak the same language. Then you build something for 3-4 years. When you deliver, then the user already needs something else. So then what he said is actually it's much better to build it step by step in piecemeal way. So build whatever is actually needed. And then the most important part was to create a common language between the actual users of the building or neighborhood and the architects, the experts, because architects speak different professional languages and there would be no common language between them. So patterns are like words, like languages. So the patterns themselves are words like table, chair, and sofa. Like imagine a table. We sort of agree what it is, what it means, but there is no clear definition of the table, but it allows us to speak about tables in general. The language is like furniture language is all the words on certain topic, and the designs are stories. Square table with 4 chairs and a sofa in the room. Imagine you need to tell the same story, but in without having this language. And that's essentially when you talk to an architect about a future house, you can say, I need 4 rooms, but you cannot really talk about real features of the house. And that's because you don't possess the language to even imagine what's going to be in a house. And it's defined the best by Ludwig Wittgenstein. He said, the limits of my language are limits of my world. Essentially, if you don't have words for something, you cannot even imagine that thing. It means unknown unknowns, right? You cannot even research something you don't know that exists. So imagine a car, right? This is old Volkswagen Golf, and we have words for major components like wheels and doors and chairs, but we don't have words for all these components. Therefore, as people who are not mechanics, cannot even discuss the quality or features of those components because we don't even know that they exist. What we know that the car exists and it moves. And only after the car is built, we can evaluate if it's a good car or bad car. But before car is built, we cannot even have a reasonable conversation with a mechanic on which car we want to build. So back to Wells Grid, and now using the patterns and general idea of creativity versus proficiency, this could be one of the possible transformations from whatever Wells Grid had before the cloud native towards the cloud native setup. So the first thing that we would recommend a company with Wells Grid to do was to take care of the business reasons for the transformation. Figure out what is the business case, get the executive commitment, and make sure that there is a transformation champion that will make sure that things are moving around. Then we would suggest to start small. So create a vision and small core team, not a massive 50 people team with massive budget. That never works for creativity, right? So because in the beginning of cloud native transformation, the creativity is more important than proficiency. Create the strategy, architecture, make everything clear, the direction clear. Then divide the team into creatives part of the team. That's the core team. That's the team that is going to build the cloud native platform and move things to microservices in the beginning. And then keep the rest of the team, 90%, 95% of the rest of the team, keep building the value in the old ways. Then the core team, which is typically anywhere between 5 to 10 people, starts building the cloud native platform through experimentation, POCs, eventually get into MVP or functional platform, hopefully in about 4 to 6 months. And of course, they're introducing new technologies, distributed systems, and prepare everything for production. In meanwhile, you want to start educating the rest of your team towards those new technologies. And once the MVP is ready, start onboarding the rest of the teams one by one or in small groups to the new platform, not all together. That is typically leads to massive disaster. And what you really want is to onboard 1 or 2 teams, then see if the platform is working, improve it a bit, scale it a bit, and continue onboarding and improving in parallel. And eventually, over a longer period of time, the entire engineering department will move to the new cloud native ways and will continue strangling the monolith and eventually maybe lift and shift the remaining pieces of applications towards the public cloud or whatever else. In the meanwhile, you shouldn't forget that you have to continue investing in those 3 horizons, the innovation and the research. Each one of those patterns can be expanded into more detailed view, like what is distributed system, all this and more. What is gradual onboarding? It includes all these elements and more. What is 3 horizons for you? What are the real goals? Because just having cloud native platform is not enough. What you really want is to be able to do things like A/B testing or data-driven decision-making, or all kind of different advanced features that are more business-oriented. Because the cloud native platform on its own is not enough. It's about helping business to do bigger things or good things faster. And another important thing is culture. Right? So in the beginning, I said cloud native is not just about technology, it's also about the culture. And culture, some say that culture is impossible to change. I prefer to believe or to use this version from the Culture Code by Daniel Coyle. And he said that culture is a set of living relationships working towards a shared goal. It's not something you are, it's something you do. So it's not your DNA, it's not something unchangeable and static, but the opposite. It's set of your daily activities, how you speak between yourself, how you manage your work, what you do day by day, and your routines, your habits, everything. That's your culture. And each one of those small things can be changed. And these are the patterns that basically say how to change or what kind of cultural changes would you expect to have if you want to be fully cloud native? And at the end, what you want to get is a backlog that is not purely delivery and features, but also that something that includes innovation and research, and you consistently balancing those three elements, and you never forget about research and innovation, and only focus on delivery. So with Container Solutions, basically for us, this is our main work, is helping companies to go through this transformation. And we even created a process we call think, design, build, run, where we basically manage this transition, starting from the assessment of current state, going through a design process and setting up the core team and creating the architecture, eventually building the production-ready MVP platform, and then continue building the rest, and then eventually helping to support the platform later on. And what's important is in this approach, in the beginning, you have reasonably low risk because the investment of time and effort is low. There's only a small team, but you're actually de-risking your future transformation dramatically using this approach, because you figure out, you're basically answering all difficult questions in the early stages, and then later on it just becomes work. And just a few words about this new COVID-19 thing. So once in a while, something like this happens, right? There is no change in market, incremental change in market share. There is a new company, new competitor, an old competitor goes away, and there is some replacement of players in the market. Sometimes the entire market collapses, right? It could be because of the virus, it could be because of some security situation, or maybe legislation, it's a financial organization, there is some change in government rules. There are all kinds of reasons for that to happen, but the entire market collapses. And we find ourselves with 1,000 toilet rolls in the house and cannot leave, and have to remain in the quarantine. So actually, in this situation, a lot of those patterns that we created for cloud native transformation would still work very well, like dynamic strategy. So dynamic strategy is a pattern that says that you cannot be fixated on your strategy for a year. What you want is to basically create a strategy, know where you're going, but all the time see around yourself if the circumstances change, and if they do, adjust and do something that is more appropriate in your circumstances. The real values of the company and people actually become much more obvious under crisis. And of course, we all want learning organizations, because that actually helps us to deal with crises much more efficiently. Remote teams, managed for creativity, public clouds, all those would be, if they would exist or when they exist in an organization, they actually help a lot to deal with traumatic crisis. And recently, we also added about 40 plus special patterns for crisis management. Patterns like cost reduction. In times of crisis, the first thing you want to do is to prepare yourself for difficulties. Of course, you want to get defensive first, right? To make sure that you can survive the difficulty. You want to be transparent with your team to reduce anxiety, and it's very important to continue innovating, because the crisis one day will be over. And then the question, will you be ready to enjoy the benefits of the new growth? Or will you come as a winner, or you will destroy your ability to innovate? And even when the crisis will be over, you will be left with nothing. Right, and this is obviously a draft. Those are the patterns and sort of the general idea how we have dealt as a company with this COVID-19 crisis. I'm not going to go into detail on that. And the last thing for today is this. Not sure if you read this book, Thinking Fast and Slow. If you didn't, I strongly recommend you to read this book. It's about cognitive biases or behavioral economics in general. And the general idea in this book is that our brain was built over billions of years, even before we were humans. And in our brain, there are two systems. The first system is fast and intuitive. That's where we take decisions on basically absolute majority, almost all the decisions taken by system one. But it's full of heuristics. Heuristics means that it sort of generally knows what to do, but sometimes it's wrong. But overall, it's pretty good and helpful for survival. And then there's system two, which is unique for humans, which is more logical. That's where you actually evaluate all the facts and you make logical decisions. The thing is that we almost never use the system two, very rarely. Only when the system one acknowledges the fact that it cannot deal with the problem. And what it means that actually there is lots and lots of things that the system one thinks that are simple, and it sort of answers them immediately, but the answer is predictably wrong. Those are the cognitive biases. So those are the things that basically create problems for us, consistent problems. So I will only show a couple of biases just to sort of show the general idea. And first one is illusion of control. So we as humans, we prefer to think that we are in control of our environment. And especially now in the circumstances of COVID-19, we can easily see that we are not in control. It's all perceived or imaginary control. But even before that, Wall Street executives and people on Wall Street and were absolutely sure that they're an amazing company that will never fail. And it doesn't have to be true, right? It could be that just around the corner, there is another competitor or another change of circumstances that will entirely destroy the company. And it's already happening and they're just not aware of it. So this is the illusion of control, that we may think that everything that is happening to us is what it depends on us, but in reality, the circumstances also dictate a lot of that. And basically, you know, if you can, the stranger is coming, whatever you like or not, they're coming, right? All these companies like Google and Starlink, and if you're not in financial business, right, in financial markets, in any other type of environment, those strangers coming too. They're all coming with new technologies, faster ways of building things, and the entire world becomes dramatically more technologically based. And the question is not if they're coming for sure. The only question is, are you ready to receive them? And if not, is it still not too late to start now? All this story is actually coming from this book that we finished last year called Cloud Native Transformation. And I'm sure you can find it if you like to read the full story. And you can find the patterns and even get a free deck of cards at that link that you can see here. And we also recently wrote a mini book about how would you deal with the crisis like COVID-19. So if you're interested, you can download it for free too. And again, just to remind you, this is the first webinar in the series of 3. The second one will happen in July 16th, and the third one in July 23rd. And if you're interested in more strategy-related and decision-making stories, then you're welcome to join the webinar with Simon Wardley and Jamie Dobson. Then thank you for joining, and Michael, who is here, he will be our next speaker next week.
Hope to see you there.
Yeah.
Yes,
and thank you.
Thank you all for coming, and have a lovely rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.